Yeah, you can go to the restroom. Hey, good morning. Back again for another episode. My aide Elliot tells me this is the fifth episode of the Richard Vedder podcast, and I'm glad to be back with you. Uh, Today, some days I have guests on, and concentrating largely lately on higher ed. We will talk some about higher ed today, but today I'm going to do it pretty much myself. I might have my aide, Elliot Winkler, show his face a little bit, but it's going to be me. And we're going to talk. There's been quite a number of developments in the last week or so that are kind of worth talking about, I think. And I get up every morning and I check the news. And this morning, just a half hour or so ago, I learned that Liz Truss, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has resigned or is resigning, uh, which has been predicted for the last few days. And Liz Truss has the dubious distinction, I would say almost unique distinction, of being the shortest lived prime minister in British history. No one in the 300 years or so of the modern institution of the prime minister, which only goes back to, you know, let's say roughly 1700 or thereabouts, only no one has served a shorter period than Liz Truss, and the next shortest was quite a bit longer than this. Liz has only been in, what, 40, 50 days, 60 days, 70 days. When did Queen Elizabeth die? She, Liz Truss became the prime minister a day or two before Queen Elizabeth died, and was Queen Elizabeth's last uh, person invested as prime minister. And now King Charles will be meeting with the successor to Liz Truss, whoever that is, sometime to anoint a new prime minister of Great Britain. Um, the British Conservative Party has run Britain for a majority of the time since 1979, when Margaret Thatcher took over. Actually, even before then, there was Ted Heath and other conservatives. But for the last 40 some years, a majority of the time, the Conservative Party has run things. There was a period the Labor Party was in and had a Thatcher-like prime minister in Tony Blair, who in many ways admired Margaret Thatcher and has said so publicly. And there's been some others. I once debated another prime minister of Great Britain, Gordon Brown, uh, in London. I had a debate with him on, of all subjects, the minimum wage, by the way. And I was at a disadvantage because when I went to the Institute for Economic Affairs for what I thought was a social visit and a lunch, and we had lunch and we had a fair amount of alcoholic beverages with lunch. Then, in the midst of the lunch, I was told, "Oh, would you be willing to debate uh, Mr. Brown, Gordon Brown, at the time shadow chancellor of the Exchequer, the what roughly Secretary of Treasury in the waiting? Uh, would you be willing to debate him on the minimum wage?" So we had a lively debate, a very lively debate on the minimum wage. So I am a bit of an Anglophile. I'll be the first to admit. I made lots and lots of trips to Great Britain over the years. I love the London theater, the West End. Uh, Sometimes I've been known to go to London to the theater rather than New York, because I think I like the London theater just a tad bit more than the New York theater. So I'm a bit of an Anglophile, as they say. So when I heard that Liz Truss was resigning, what were my thoughts? Other than that they screwed it up the way she did a monumentally bad job of trying to be like Margaret Thatcher in promising massive tax cuts, but at the same time showing a complete lack of fiscal discipline by saying, "Oh, we're going to also increase spending. We're going to subsidize uh, heating bills for British citizens, so that their cost of heating their houses doesn't go up dramatically this winter." And that's something Margaret Thatcher, I do not think, would have done. And she certainly never have tried to allow higher spending, lower tax revenues, massive deficits at a time when the world economy and the British economy are a bit on the fragile side to begin with. So that's what happened. And the markets just uh, 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 exploded. The pound decreased in value. Uh, the British government, the Treasury felt it had to intervene to keep the uh, British pound, British bonds from collapsing completely, etc. And so political decision made sort of without any thought of basic economic principles led to a disaster. Liz Truss is no Margaret Thatcher. Uh, Here is the real Margaret Thatcher. In this picture here, you can see Margaret. Here I am, and here's Margaret Thatcher. That's my wife, Karen. We're actually in London, uh, uh, and we are um, having coffee together. My wife actually served Margaret Thatcher coffee, and uh, uh, at the time that picture was taken, by the way, Margaret Thatcher was in her 80s, within 3 years of death. And if you believe the movie, I think I've already said this, but if you believe the movie, The Iron Lady, uh, you would have thought that Meryl Streep in it. You would have thought Margaret Thatcher was kind of befuddled and senile and sort of barely able to function. In reality, if she was one of the pretty darn sharp, I thought, uh, and so on. But anyway, I regret, I lament the problems that the British are having, but enough of that. Let's move on to something different. Um, let's talk about another incident that had came to my attention in the last week, and this is a higher ed issue. Let's talk about something that went on at New York University. I've always thought New York University was a darn good school, one of the best schools in the East that was not an Ivy League school. Uh, but now my thinking about NYU has diminished somewhat. I'll have to be honest. Uh, I've spent some time there. I did a debate there myself once. Let's half dozen years ago, probably, and 5 years ago at the most. Actually, now that I think about it, 4 or 5 years ago, it was less than 5 years ago. So I have done debates at NYU. I've um, spoken at NYU myself, um, and consider it a pretty good school. But now I think its reputation it is at best the second best university in the borough of Manhattan, and I am down on NYU at the moment. Uh, so, a man by the name of Maitland Jones, Maitland Jones, is a chemist at NYU, has been for the last 14, 15 years. But Mr. Professor Jones, who is no ordinary professor. He is 84 years old. He's older than I am. He's he almost was in the New Testament of the Bible, if not the Old Testament. He's been around forever. But what Mr. Jones, Professor Jones, did till the age of 70, he had an endowed chair in organic chemistry at another school, smaller than NYU, but pretty well known, not bad school, Princeton University. He was a senior professor at Princeton. He loved students. He was a great professor. He taught them the mainline organic chemistry class. He did a lot of research, uh, well known, wrote literally hundreds of research papers. And in my research about Professor Jones, I learned that he had co authored papers with over 100 students. 100 students. That's phenomenal. I think in my lifetime, I maybe have written papers with a dozen students, and a few things like Wall Street Journal articles with some others that weren't formal papers, but still some form of recognition. I might, if we stretch things, get up to 15 or 20. And I thought that's pretty darn good for a lifetime. And Jones, I may be miscounting, I think is over 100 students. So this guy was a big time professor. When he retired in 2007 from Princeton, the dean of faculties went on and on about how we've lost one of our great professors, great for his teaching as well as his research. So we have an important name in organic chemistry retiring. In retirement, he didn't want all. I haven't talked to Professor Jones, but I don't think he wanted all the other stuff that goes with being a professor. He didn't want to have to feel he had to go to department meetings. He didn't want to be on committees. He didn't want to do a lot of the other things that professors get roped into doing. He would just be continue to teach organic chemistry to students wanting to learn organic chemistry, and especially to future medical students. Organic chemistry is required for everyone going to medical school for a good reason. And he was taught. So after he retired from Princeton, NYU says, "Hey, come teach for us. All you have to do is teach the main organic chemistry course to masses of students because you're good at it. You do it." So 14, 15 years ago, he started to do that, and he's done it successfully since. He was hired on a year-by-year basis. In other words, at any time, NYU could have said, "Professor Jones, you're done. You've done your job well, but we don't need your services anymore." Well, they finally did it, and they did it in a very undistinguished, not nice way. Because why did they do it? They finally let him go. Why? A group of students signed a petition saying, "We don't want Professor Jones teaching at NYU." Now, it was a pretty good sized group of students, 80 students signed a petition. Get rid of Professor Jones. That's what roughly the petition said. Now you say, well, that's a hell of a lot of students, but you know how big his class was? 350. 350. Here, Elliot, my buddy here, we're at little old Ohio University. There are very, very, very few classes with 350 students. Elliot, are you in any classes that big?
I don't think so.
No, Elliot doesn't think so.
Maybe like 150.
He said 150, 200. And I have taught a few classes with 300 students, 350. At my school, the largest lecture hall seats 440. So anyway, so Professor Jones is teaching a very, very large number of students at a private university, expensive private university. So this is kind of a big deal. But when 20% of them, or 22, 23% of them said, get rid of him, the university said, yes. The customer is always right. He's out. But why was he out? Was he out because he wasn't coming to class? Was he out because he was sexually propositioning young ladies or young men for that matter? No. He was out because he was a tough grader. He gave a lot of low grades. And what that means, the students thought, they would have a hard time getting into a good medical school. Because if you get a C, for example, in organic chemistry, that's going to extremely likely reduce your eliminate maybe your chances of getting to go to Harvard Medical School or Yale, wherever, John Hopkins, wherever one wanted to go. So med schools historically have chosen students based solely on academic credentials, period. Good student, you get in. Bad students, you don't. Now that's changing. I'll come back to that in a minute. In a way, in a very disturbing way, extremely disturbing way. But that is the general picture with Professor Jones. So Jones was let go because the students didn't like him. Now we have student evaluations at every university, sometimes in a formal way that the university administers a student evaluation form, sometimes less formally, but every university has it. There are other evaluation services. RateMyProfessor.com is very common, for example. And so the students have pretty decent information about how popular is a professor, and if he's unpopular, why is he unpopular or she unpopular, etc. Maitland Jones uh, uh, was determined to be unpopular not by the formal student evaluation process, but by an informal petition. Now this raises the question: can students? What would the world be like if students everywhere could just say, Professor X and Professor Y is out because we don't like him? If that were to happen, by the way, there weren't in the long run. There wouldn't be as many professors, I don't think. Now I'll have to admit, now having just said that, argue with myself. Adam Smith claimed in The Wealth of Nations, a wonderful book written in 1776, a long time ago, 246 years ago, that Adam Smith said the teaching at Oxford went to hell. He didn't use those words. When the students paid their tuition fees not to the professor, but to the university. Before, at one point, if you were a student at Oxford, you went into class, the professor said, here's what the tuition fee is, pay me that amount. And then I presume the professor turned some of that over to the university for the class and other expenses. At one point, then, Oxford changed the system and said, no, we pay the university, we'll pay the professor. And Smith said when that happened, the quality of teaching went to hell. It went way down because the professors no longer were beholden directly to the students. So they paid less attention to whether the students liked or disliked their classes. And they didn't do as good a job of teaching. Adam Smith, 1776. I believe him. So there is an argument that student input into how good the professor is has some role of legitimacy. And so we have student evaluation forums, and we have, in the last half century, introduced student evaluations into the process. At a lot of places, it doesn't count for a lot. I always, this will be bragging, I guess, but I always got tremendous student evaluations. And I don't know what the hell good it did me. Maybe it did. Maybe I made an extra $100 somewhere along the line. But, you know, but that I'm getting far afield. Enough about myself. So Maitland Jones got fired, non-renewed, not because he didn't know the subject, not because he was harassing the students, but because he was too difficult and or perceived to be too difficult by the students. An interesting set of affairs. And that brings me to the broader issue of medical school education. If there's one area where you want the students to be good, it's in medicine, for God's sakes. You want the people treating patients, later on doctors, you want them to be good. In the United States, for 3 years in a row, life expectancy has fallen. That's never happened before. Life expectancy is falling in the U.S. It may have the pandemic played a role, and now drugs and fentanyl and things like that are playing a role in shooting up each other in the cities. All of these forms of crime, forms of non-illness based deaths are playing a very and tragic role. So it is important that we have the best and the brightest kids go to med school, and it is important that we have high standards. But what is the latest trend is that most med schools now and many other schools for other forms of academic endeavors are demanding that students, in order to participate, and they're saying the same thing about the professors, especially the professors, that you have to sign what I would call a loyalty oath. You have to say, I am committed to eliminating, rather, to promoting diversity and inclusion in the process of academic life. What the hell does the racial composition, the sexual orientation, the ethnicity, the gender preferences of students have to do directly with learning? Very, very little, if any. And yet, the colleges are insisting in some cases, many cases, that the professors agree that they will be diligent in promoting equity and diversity in the classroom. And I think what is happening at the universities are the diversity and inclusion people are taking over, and the faculty are becoming hired hands. They're becoming like the custodians. They're sort of high level custodians. They get paid more than the custodians. Uh, uh, they uh, are less directed in their work in the sense that every minute of their time they have to report to someone, sign in a times on a clock, that they're at work and so on. But they are becoming more like ordinary employees, where historically the faculty ran, if not the total university, they ran the process of dealing with academic standards, hiring, firing, promoting, uh, tenuring, detenuring faculty. And they decided, what are we going to teach? What courses? What courses are we going to insist that students have in order to get a degree? And that process is undergoing fundamental change. I'm in the state of Ohio. In the state of Ohio, recently, Oberlin College, a very well known, highly regarded liberal arts college, one that I have had some issues with for years, but nonetheless has historically a good reputation. Oberlin College just last week, I think, changed its bylaws. The Board of Trustees changed the bylaws that it's more or less said the faculty no longer run this place or have a predominant role in running this place. They have a subordinate role in running this place. And they still have an important role with regards to instructional matters, but their input is not important in other regards, uh, setting tuition fees, admission standards, uh, uh, etc. Uh, and the faculty role has been downgraded somewhat, at least in the eyes of faculty of Oberlin College. That's going on all over the country right now. It's going all over. And another, so markets respond to this. Uh, we learned last week that the number of new PhDs in the United States took a big dip in the last year, a big dip, a huge dip. I think, and it's broken down by race, ethnicity, and other criteria. I know for males, it, uh, or rather, yeah, for whites, I think for white males it was down more than 10%. So we're having big drops in the number of people wanting to get PhDs. Markets are responding because what's happened to recent PhDs? Well, a lot of them don't get good jobs. A lot of them some of them end up teaching high school. Some of them end up becoming adjunct professors, trying to get courses at small schools or even big schools, getting paid maybe $5,000 a course. Maybe if they work their butts off and they are able to do work at two or three different schools, maybe they can make 50,000 a year. Maybe they can do as well as a high school teacher. Maybe. And of course, to get a PhD these days in the humanities takes on average 7 or 8 years, which is sinful. It's ridiculous. Um, as one who, by the way, received my PhD 33 months after I received after I started graduate school, uh, 3 years after I graduated from undergraduate school, at the age of 24, I had a PhD, and that's the way it was. Uh, uh, a friend of mine who's a renowned university president, Gordon Gee, president now of West Virginia U, Uh, After he graduated from college at 22, he because he was in his church, he became a missionary for a year or two. He was a Mormon, and the Mormons go on mission. Uh, but when he started grad school, from the day he started grad school, in a period of 4 years, he had not one, but two doctor's degrees from Ivy League schools, Columbia University, the good school in Manhattan. I'm now raising, I'm mad at NYU today, so I'll say uh, uh, the Columbia is the better school. And the rankings, by the way, support that. So here we have a the professoriate is in decline, academia is in decline, enrollments are in decline, and we're starting. We need to things need to change. 8-year PhDs are ridiculous. When 6-year PhDs are ridiculous. A person ought to be able to get a PhD in 4 years at least. That four, when I got mine in 3, that was unusually short, but 4 or 5 was quite commonplace. Elliot, how long did it take your dad to get a PhD?
I'm honestly not sure. Maybe 8 years or 6 years.
My aide, Elliot here's dad, is a college professor who got a degree from another school, Yale University, in 5, 6 years, something like that. But it takes too long. The rewards are too small. So the number of PhDs is starting to fall. Um, Markets are starting to work. They take a long time to work because of the lags involved, but they're happening. So we are uh, having to deal with that. The Well, maybe I've run this topic into the ground. I don't know. We've been talking about it for a half an hour. Let me switch for just a completely a change of pace. Uh, Talk generally about. There's two things that are worth talking about. One would be the elections, which are now um, 19 days away. I have voted already, by the way. So, and this is increasingly the case. Election day is meaning less and less, and I think that's kind of too bad. I had a legitimate reason to vote early because on election day, I'm literally am going to be traveling. I'm going to be on an airplane and left my home, so I couldn't vote on election day. So I had to vote early. So I went down and voted, and it went very smoothly, etc. But nowadays, increasingly, a large percentage of the population are voting early. And I think that is kind of, I'm not sure that's a good thing. I think it opens the door for mischief, for complaints. If you have mailing, bullying about mail ballots being stolen or whatever. And I'm sort of a believer in the old fashioned idea that you go to the poll and vote on election day. And by the way, the Europeans do it that way. If in France, and I very seldom look to France's examples for anything, but if you, I believe it's true in France. You vote on election day or you don't vote. Now, maybe they make an exception, as we do, for people in the armed forces serving overseas. But anyway, so we have an election day coming up in 19 days. People are always asking me, what do you think is going to happen? How the hell would I know? What do I know about these things? I used to work for Congress. I have a little bit above average ability to understand the nuances of the political process. Probably I'm not a stupid guy on those kinds of things. Right now, the signs are moving in the direction of the Republicans. The Democrats had one great issue that they have played up the abortion issue because of the Dobbs Supreme Court decision. Uh, but I think in effect, the impact of that peaked too early for political purposes. People are starting to say, so what? For most of us, the most of us don't have extreme views on abortion anyway, where the notion that you're either pro-life or pro-choice is a simplistic statement of reality. You can be in principle in favor of maintaining human life, but accept the concept that abortion should happen in a case of rape and incest and so forth, or where a woman's life is, mother's life is endangered, or even maybe in the first couple, 3 months of pregnancy, you got pregnant, you didn't want to get pregnant, but the fetus could not survive uh, uh, on its own. So, in a sense, a lot of Americans believe, and I think probably maybe a majority of Americans believe, that terminating a pregnancy within, say, 15 weeks of conception is something okay. And but uh, terminating pregnancy in the 38th week or 39th week, a week before birth, is pretty close to just out and out murder, infanticide, because the baby could probably survive uh, uh, outside the womb on its own. So I think a lot of Americans are in this, not one way or the other, but in the sort of in between on abortion. And I think the Democrats thought they were going to win big on the abortion issue. And I think it has worked to their advantage, probably, but not dramatically to their advantage. And I'm in the state of Ohio. We have a gubernatorial candidate, the Democrats, a former mayor of the city of Dayton, Ohio, Nan Whaley. Every commercial, everything is about abortion, 100%. And she said so. I read in the newspaper this morning. She said this election is about abortion. What's she polling? She's way behind, 15, 20 points behind. She's getting slaughtered by the governor, Mike DeWine. And Mike DeWine is no charismatic guy, that everyone wows over. He's in his 70s. He's a lifetime politician. He got beat once running for the U.S. Senate. He's, he's a nice guy and whatnot, but he is a guy that just people ooh and ah over, and yet he's slaughtering his Democratic opponent, who is a younger, vigorous woman and a former mayor of the city of Dayton. So, and I see more of that. So, right now, my hunch is the Dems are in big trouble, not only in the House of Representatives, where almost certainly they're going to lose. If I were going to guess, maybe by 20 or more, they're going to lose at least, the Dems are going to lose at least 20 seats in the House. That's a lot of seats. The control of the House of Representatives will pass to Republican control. The Republicans take control. We're going to see all kinds of investigation of Hunter Biden, for example, just to pick one thing. The Republicans are going to try to embarrass the Democrats for the next 2 years. I think we've gotten into an era where we're excessively partisan and we're spending too much time trying to knock down the other. The Dems are trying to knock down Donald Trump, who has been out of office now almost 2 years. The Republicans are trying to knock down leading Democratic candidates, and in a way that is almost unseemly. I think we've become hyper partisan, and I think that's a mistake. But anyway, I think the Republicans are going to win the House by a comfortable margin. The big debate is the Senate. 6 months, a year ago, my prediction was probably the Dems would take control of the Senate. Um, and but things have kind of moved in favor of the Republicans a bit. Um, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, you say, who is the most endangered incumbent Republican senator? The answer would have been Ron Johnson, the senator from Wisconsin. Nowadays, the polls show Ron Johnson is up 5, 6 points over his competitor. Uh, Even the governor of Wisconsin, a Democrat, Tony Evers, is, I think, 50-50 whether he wins. A Democratic senator in Arizona, Mark Kelly, who's trying to act sort of moderate, middle of the road, is getting beat. I thought in Ohio, where I live, another race, I thought the Democratic candidate, Tim Ryan, a veteran member of the House of Representatives, was putting on a pretty slick and convincing campaign, uh, you know, saying, oh, I agree with Trump on trade and I agree with Trump on this, trying to sound almost like a pro-Trump Democrat. I thought it was a pretty clever strategy to follow. But I think he's been losing momentum to his opponent, Vance. And I think Vance is a less capable campaigner. He may be smarter than Ryan, but he's not as adept as a campaigner. But I think if I were betting, I would bet Vance will win. That's what the polls are now showing. A lot of the races who've been very close are starting to break more often than not in the Republican direction. If the Republicans, uh, uh, Pennsylvania, and Georgia are the two others everyone want to talk about. Georgia, everyone said, "Oh my God, Warnock is going to win in a landslide because Herschel Walker is a very flawed candidate. He's very flawed on a lot of grounds. He's not the most articulate person in the world. He has a lot of negative things about him that have been raised, including women who've claimed that he's, uh, you know, got them pregnant and then abortions were had and so forth. A lot of unsavory personal life things. Not as articulate as Warnock, who's, after all, a minister of the most famous black church in the world, probably, certainly in the state of Georgia, where the King Church, and so a slick operator. Warnock's going to win in a line, everyone's saying. Now you look at the polls, they're pretty close to even, 50-50. That race could go either way. The Democrats' darling, liberal darling in the running the governor's race. Brian Kemp is the governor is winning handily, not handily, but a nice margin over his opponent, and who everyone thought had a real chance. So we have across the nation, as I look at the races one by one, I see, if not a huge Republican surge, I see some evidence of that. I read in the news this morning that there's a huge chance that a Republican will be elected governor of the state of Oregon. That hasn't happened in decades. There is maybe a 10 or 20% chance that the governor of New York, where the Dems have dominated for decades, that the governor of New York may get defeated. So it's again, I think that's a long shot for the Republicans. But so if you ask me who's going to, if I were betting, doing Las Vegas style betting on the election, I would be betting on the Republicans. And I think, given the woke and disastrous policies that have largely been followed by the Biden administration, I think probably that is good for the country. We Biden has said the other day, he said, first thing if when the Democrats take control is we're going to codify Roe versus Wade. Well, the chances of that happening, I think, are very remote. Not zero, but remote. So I've given my political predictions for the day. My economic predictions of the day. The stock market is kind of going back up a little bit, but is down almost 20% from the high. The Dow's a little over 30,000 now. It peaked at almost 37,000. The Dow is down 19% from its peak. S&P down more. NASDAQ down more. So Americans are wary, investors are wary about the economy. They're worried about it. Jamie Dimon, the president, the CEO of America's largest and probably most prestigious financial institution other than the Fed, actually probably more prestigious than the Fed in my opinion. Jamie Dimon, himself a Democrat, by the way, politically, if you want, not that it's, has predicted a pretty noteworthy recession. The probability of a recession occurring in the next year is, by leading economists, is now above 90%. My former student, Robert Fry, FRY, recently won the award from the National Association of Business Economists for being the top forecaster for the last 12 months. So the top forecaster, according to the National Association of Business Economists, I've talked to frequently, and he says it's 90% probability we'll be in a recession. I don't know if that's the precise percentage he puts on it, but a high probability we'll be in a recession in the next year, maybe 6 months. Jobs for next summer for college. I worry about Elliot here, my buddy here. What's he going to be doing next summer or the summer after that? And college jobs, which right now are dime a dozen. You can go to work at least at McDonald's. You can get a job in this country easy now, but not as easy as a month ago, or 2 months ago, or 3 months ago. And how is that going to play out over the next year or so? So I think we're in for some tough times, and when you have the energy problems that are existing in Europe, you have the Ukrainian problem, you got Iran, who is unstable as hell and crazy as hell. You got North Korea, where you have a certifiably lunatic prime minister who even now, he's approaching 40 years old now. He's no longer even a kid, but he still thinks that as his country starves to death, that the solution is to launch missile attacks or threaten to and try to show off his uh, importance in the world. So we have a seriously destabilized world economy now. My dear friend Vladimir Putin, I should have brought the Vladimir Putin picture over. Yeah, Elliot will bring me. You know, I know Putin. I've drunk vodka with Putin. Here, somewhere here, I'm with Putin. Here's me. Here's Putin. Uh, uh, Vetter, Putin. That's the Kremlin. So I know these dudes. And Putin is one smart dude, by the way. His IQ, if you gave an SAT test or ACT test to Biden and to Putin in the appropriate language, of course, and cultural context, Putin would beat the hell out of Biden. No question. Even Biden in his prime, let's say 10, 20, 30 years ago, he would have beaten him. Putin is a smart dude, very smart. Uh, the only one that's smarter than him, probably that's in the mix right now, is Benjamin Netanyahu, who's coming back. I predict will be prime minister of Israel again within a year. And Netanyahu is smart. Okay, I'm babbling here. We need to move on. Anyway, my prediction for the economy is uh, not too great. I think we are in for a tough time of it. People say, well, are you selling your stocks? No, I'm not selling my stocks or stuff. In fact, I'm like Warren Buffett. I just keep buying all the time. Buy, buy, buy forever. If you buy long enough. And ever hear of the principle of compound interest? If you can earn 7% on your money year in, year out, in a decade, it doubles. And in 2 decades, it's 4 times as great. In 3 decades, it's 8 times as great. 4 decades, it's 16 times as great. So if you start at 40, at 30, at 70, you have 16 times what you had at 0. That's what I hope Elliot here is listening to this. He has very little choice about it, but he is. Okay, I've been babbling now for an hour, or the better part of an hour, and I promised you today would be a short um, uh, exercise. Uh, I am going to go back to the topic soon of American exceptionalism. I think our nation is losing its edge. And I'm also going to go back to the perennial higher ed issues that I've been talking about because I think higher ed is a weak link in our economy right now. It should be a strong link and in our society generally. And I worry a lot about the universities, and that's something I do know a little bit about. So I'm going back there in future uh, occasion. Let me tell you about where I'm going this weekend. I'm going to meet with uh, as a board member, I'm a member of the board of directors of the National Association of Scholars, an organization that has made up of traditional academics. A lot of people call them conservative academics. A lot of them are politically probably right of center, but they're mostly traditionalists. They believe in teaching the subjects, solid subjects. They believe in teaching a lot of history and politicals and a lot of English literature, a lot of the humanities, a lot of the liberal arts to students. I think students need a solid background. Uh, some of them, are going further. There's big, by the way, there's a pretty big move, I think, to reteach the classics uh, in education because they don't do it K through 12. And I'm eating lunch today with a bunch of people starting their charter school in my town, and I think they want Latin and Greek. They want the students to learn Latin. Maybe there's an argument for that. Well, we're going on far afield. Next week we will resume. I probably will be bringing back some guests. George Leaf loves to be on my show, I think, and I love to have George. Uh, we had Andrew Gillen on last week. He did a great job. We had Graham Walker did a smash up job and is itching to reappear. So we'll bring some of those guys back and probably some new guests as well. Uh, I keep picking on my aide here, Elliot, and Elliot is going to make a cameo inaugural appearance as an actual guest on the show one of these days, and I'll make him think about what that'll be about. So, with all that by way of a longish monologue that went on an hour, it's uh, time to say goodbye and for today. And I thank you for joining us, and I will look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye bye.
Alright, go to end stream. Yep. And then